hello everyone, and a really warm welcome to this evening's Co-op live call on modern slavery and the illegal immigration bill. For those who don't know me, I'm Rob Bates. I'm the Political and Parliamentary Officer at the Co-operative Party. And just to kick things off before we start proper, just a few tips on making sure we get the most out of tonight's event. Closed captions are available. If you need them, you can just press the closed captions link at the bottom, possibly through the More button as well. Just a note, you are being recorded. This call is being recorded. We know that our members can't always make the call live, so we record it for anyone who can watch it on YouTube afterwards. So if you don't wish to be recorded, if you don't wish for your face to be seen, now's your chance to flick your camera off and go to audio only. That's absolutely fine. You'll see you will have been muted. If you could just keep that on for now, that's just to make sure the calls are clear as possible. And to make sure we don't have any distractions or background noises, anything like that. We've got a couple of fantastic speakers we're hearing from tonight, who I'm sure, like me, you're really excited to hear from on this particular topic. If we've time afterwards, we'll be taking questions from the floor, as it were. What we'll do, you can pop your questions in the chat box, and depending on volume, to try and make sure we get through all of them, what I might do is ask them on your behalf, or we might be able to take them from the floor, depending on how long we've got. Finally, just to emphasise, the Co-operative Party believes our values should be reflected in our actions as well as our policy. So again, to reiterate, we want everyone to feel welcome, respected and safe. Please remember this during tonight's discussion and any contributions that you make, particularly given the content of tonight's topic, which might be more difficult for some than others. So with that being said, tonight's Cooperation Live will be focusing on modern slavery and the illegal migration bill. You'll all have seen the developments over recent days and weeks around the government's proposals on migration legislation and a subsequent bill which will have significant impacts on victims of modern slavery, amongst others. The Cooperative Party and the wider Co-op movement has a long history in addressing modern slavery. This includes signing up over, I think it's now over 100 councils to our local councils to our modern slavery charter, which commits them to going beyond existing requirements and proactively vetting their own supply chains to ensure no instances of modern slavery. And just in the last few days, you might have been one of them. We've had over 1,500 Co-operative Party supporters who wrote to their MPs calling on them to support opposition amendments to the illegal migration bill that would help mitigate some of the most damaging elements of it. So without further ado, I'll move on to our speakers now. First, I'm going to introduce Justine. Justine is the director of the anti-slavery charity Unseen. Justine helped with the development of the 2015 Modern Slavery Act, set up the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline, and as part of Unseen's wider work, does much to help stamp out instances of modern slavery for good. So Justine, over to yourself.
Great, thank you very much, Rob, and good evening, everybody. Really delighted to be here with you tonight. I thought it'd be helpful to talk a little bit about the work that Unseen does before I touch on the new immigration bill and also look at how we can tackle the issue of modern slavery. So Unseen is a charity. We have been working for about 15 years. We do a number of key things. We provide direct survivor support services to men and women. We do lots of training, awareness raising with policing, local authorities, NHS, as well as businesses. And we do what we call influencing systemic change, which is working with the UK government, but also working with governments overseas to see what more we can do to prevent vulnerable people from being exploited. And I've been with Unseen coming up for 7 years now. Prior to that, I was the senior policy advisor at the Home Office, and so had the privilege of drafting the Modern Slavery Act that was enacted in 2015. And I think it's fair to say at the time it was considered world leading. And this is why our concerns, not only my own personal concerns, but the concerns of Unseen as an organisation working in the sector, and the sector as a whole, are extremely concerned about the current bill that the government has put forward. And I want to just touch on a number of reasons as to why we believe that the new bill will not do what we need. One, in terms of stopping migration, and secondly, in terms of supporting the very vulnerable people that the Modern Slavery Act was introduced for in the first place. So in terms of the bill that the government has brought forward. I think the main criticism and the main serious concern that we have is that under the new rules, genuine victims of human trafficking arriving in small boats or by any other irregular means won't be allowed to enter the national referral mechanism. So the national referral mechanism is simply the identification and support mechanism that the government has in place. And that's a real concern. We're treating potential victims as if they are indeed criminals. And obviously we want to make sure that we can do everything we can to support and protect people who sometimes don't come of their own volition, may be forced into small boats. And we have some evidence of that through the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline that Unseen runs, as well as clandestinely through lorries and through other means to get into the UK, whether that's forged or false ID documents or other clandestine routes. We also believe that the new law could trap countless victims of modern slavery and human trafficking in indefinite exploitation. And that's because we believe that those victims who are either here already in the UK or may be coming in the future will be extremely worried about their asylum status. For the reasons I've just mentioned, they'll be treated as a criminal. They won't be allowed to raise concerns around being a victim of modern slavery or human trafficking. And so they could be at significant risk of being exploited. We believe traffickers will definitely have more leverage over their victims, as they'll be threatened with reporting them to the authorities. And we already see that as a tactic being deployed towards these potential victims and towards those who are extremely vulnerable. So at the moment, we are allowing, we look after potential victims regardless of their status, regardless of their nationality, and we are signed up to international legislation, and also we were bound by the EU directive and the Convention on trafficking. So we've had, and we continue to have, international obligations around what we should do and how we should help and support victims of modern slavery and human trafficking, and these are in effect being thrown out through this proposed legislation. Again, another concern is around the bill blocking the possibility of people challenging wrongful decisions in the courts. And I think for us, this is a really worrying precedent for the rule of law and actually all of our human rights, our fundamental human rights. And genuine victims of trafficking modern slavery could be held in immigration detention or unsuitable accommodation. And we've seen this occurring already, not just for days or weeks, but indeed months and possibly years. The illegal migration bill puts a duty on the Home Secretary to remove anybody that arrives in the UK irregularly or illegally, as the government is using in terms of terminology, and that includes victims of human trafficking and modern slavery. We only have a number of returns agreements with other countries or safe third country agreements. So at the moment, the UK government has returns agreements with Albania, Georgia, Nigeria, India, Pakistan and Serbia, and has only managed to reach third country agreement with Rwanda at the moment. I think the challenge that we have with that is that if you look at the statistics from the Modern Slavery and Exploitation Helpline for 2022, we had 100 different nationalities of potential victims indicated through the helpline. So we know that this is an issue that affects far more individuals than maybe 3 or 4 different countries. And it also affects UK nationals as well. So the Home Secretary will have the power to detain people for 28 days or more, meaning that the government could potentially detain thousands of vulnerable people. And I'll come on to the statistics around those who are indicated as potential victims, particularly those who are coming in on small boats. We believe this policy is only going to cost the taxpayer more. The annual financial cost of operating the UK's detention system for the year ending March 2022 was around £94 million. And that's without bearing in mind the requirements placed under this current bill that's working its way through Parliament. And you know, it's untold cost in terms of the human cost as well. We believe that no human trafficking victim should be held in immigration detention ever. You know, the experience that potential victims and survivors go through requires months and years of counselling, months and years of recovering from the trauma of being in that type of situation. And the trauma will only be magnified if we have vulnerable individuals who have experienced exploitation and are then subject to immigration detention. I just want to talk a little bit about the the massive abuse of the system that the government is suggesting. We believe that is a total myth. The government says there is a massive abuse of the modern slavery system by people arriving by irregular means, such as small boats crossings through the channel. And we believe this is simply untrue. Only 6% of the people that travelled across the channel in small boats in 2022 claimed that they were victims of modern slavery or were referred as victims of modern slavery. The overwhelming majority of people who arrive across the channel by boat and say they are victims of modern slavery are considered to have a legitimate claim. 85% of those 6% of people were identified as potential victims and received a positive reasonable grounds decision. Now, these are reasonable grounds decisions that are made by the Home Office themselves. So the Home Office believes that a person is a victim of modern slavery if they receive one of these reasonable grounds decisions and are given access to help and support. So we just believe that simply some of the facts and figures that are being used by the government and used by ministers are simply not true and do not bear truth in terms of what we know and see and the information that we receive from the government around those who are claiming to be victims of modern slavery. I think what we've also seen over the last 3 or 4 years is this conflation of trafficking and people smuggling. Now, we know that if 6% of people are indicated as being potential victims of modern slavery and they are coming in on small boats, then 94% are potentially, economic migrants, those seeking asylum. But we know that that then is, facilitated people smuggling by those who are providing these boats and providing the means through which these individuals can access the UK. But it's really not helpful that some politicians and journalists are deliberately conflating human trafficking and people smuggling. Confusing these two very different things makes it easier for the public to accept the changes to the law that will really harm and genuinely harm victims of modern slavery. And human trafficking is a crime against the individual. It's a form of modern slavery, with traffickers using force, coercion, deception to both trick people into exploitation and keep them there. For human trafficking, there's always this misconception that we need to have travel across international borders, and that's just not the case. It can be across a street, it can be from one town to another. Smuggling, however, is facilitated by criminal gangs, and it's something entirely different. It's a crime against the state and paying someone to move an individual illegally across an international border. So we have been working with lots of non-governmental organisations across the sector within the modern slavery sphere, and we have been lobbying government to actually make changes to the bill so that we can ensure that those victims who are extremely vulnerable can get access to the help and support they not only need but they deserve. Just in terms of thinking about the best ways to tackle modern slavery, I mean, it's very easy to say we can tackle it and very difficult to do. I think prevention, absolutely. If we can prevent people from being exploited in the first place, then that's the best possible outcome. I think what we lack is consistent data. we lack the evidence, and in fact, you know, we've been using anecdotal evidence from my time in the Home Office. Data and evidence was very limited. Unseen has one of the biggest data sets within the UK now, aside from the UK government, because we've got lots of individuals contacting us, whether that's through statutory agencies like policing, like immigration themselves, Border Force, the Gangmasters and Labour Abuse Authority, as well as the NHS and local authorities. But we also get lots of individuals contacting us who are in exploitative situations, many whom are UK nationals, many whom are not. And also those who have no status and those who maybe have outstayed their visa requirements or have been working outside of their visa requirements, are very worried and concerned about the implications of being reported to the authorities. So we definitely want to work more collaboratively with those both within statutory agencies, but also those across the sector, to build that evidence base so that we can start to look at, well, how do we reduce the vulnerabilities of those who are either already in the UK, whether that's UK nationals or other nationals, or those who may be thinking about travelling to the UK. We know that the routes to claim asylum are extremely limited. I saw on social media, on one of Unseen's posts in the last couple of days, many members of the public saying, well, people shouldn't come and they should just claim asylum legitimately in the country where they are. Unfortunately, there are no routes. We have very limited visa routes and asylum routes for those who are at significant risk. And that's one of the issues. And that's why we continue to see more and more people crossing the channel. Do we think that this bill will stop people getting in boats and coming across the channel? Absolutely not. We've already seen from individuals who are in camps in Calais saying they are still wanting to make that journey despite and in spite of what the government is doing. Now, none of us, I'm sure, on this call, none of us at Unseen want to see anybody getting in a small boat and jeopardising their own safety, and more importantly, the safety of young children coming into the UK. The challenge we now have is how can we get the government to look at this through the lens of proportionality and reasonableness, and make sure that we don't have a sledgehammer to crack a nut. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Justine. Thank you for that. Loads of info in there. I know we'll be keen to follow up on. And just a reminder, actually, for everyone, if you want to put your questions for Justine in the chat, please feel free to do so. Particularly, Justine, sort of demystifying that some of the information that we're hearing is really important, I think. So thank you for that. I'm also delighted we're joined on the call by Jess Phillips, who is the MP for Birmingham Yardley and the Shadow Minister for the Home Office. Now, Jess, you'll have seen, has done fantastic work and is very active and vocal in addressing some of the more pernicious and damaging aspects of this legislation and more widely. So, Jess, over to you on this one as well.
Thank you so much. I'm not sure that I can add anything much more to what Justine has said. She is absolutely bang on right. I suppose just for a bit of context, prior to being a member of Parliament, I ran one of the modern slavery support services that covered the entirety of the West Midlands for men, women, children, for all groups through the organisation that I used to run through, that is part of the Home Office contract. And I suppose it is important for me to say that, and this often happens, this happened during the Domestic Abuse Act as well, which is a government bill, although if, you know, in common parlance, people seem to think it was my bill. It absolutely wasn't. It's a government bill, and had I written it, it would have been a lot better. I have found myself in a position of trying to defend the Modern Slavery Act and the current system of modern slavery, which is not something that I don't think needs complete and utter reform. It's the the government often will undermine itself so much that opposition politicians like me, who the very principle of the Modern Slavery Act, of course, is one that I would defend with my life, but I find myself in a position of trying to assert previous government promises, Conservative government promises and trying to defend their legislation back at them, which is not always a comfortable place to be in. I mean, with the DA bill, I actually went to the Supreme Court to try and stop them proroguing it and it being lost. So, you know, I took the government to court to defend a government bill, and I find myself in a similar situation now. So I think it is important to say that from the Labour Party front bench perspective, there is lots of work going on, and with much more meat on the bones to follow. And in fact, we were expecting a modern slavery bill. In fact, the government have promised a new modern slavery bill, which we saw as a real opportunity to look at some of the reforms that were needed in the national referral mechanism, and take forward some more things. But from the Labour Party's perspective, a sort of revolution in the system of modern slavery in the United Kingdom is undoubtedly needed, both from a support perspective, but also from, you know, the issue of supply chains globally is also another big factor, which currently I don't think the bill is tackling in the way that it had every intention to do, to be fair to Theresa May. But, you know, it was quite world-beating legislation when it came forward, and actually it was always going to be a bit of suck it and see what worked. I can't believe I just said world-beating. Oh my God, I've been captured. I got up at 4:45 this morning, so and the first person I saw this morning was Theresa May. So if I start sounding like Theresa May, I can only apologise. I'm glad she'd left the room by the point I was asked to make my remarks. So, like, I think that's really important, and I agree with it, and I won't just repeat everything that Justine has said with regards to the painful, and it has largely fallen to myself, to Theresa May, and to Ian Duncan Smith to constantly try and keep pointing out with, you know, detailed knowledge and understanding of the national referral mechanism, why this bill just shouldn't have anything about modern slavery in it. It's I mean, the government have moved the modern slavery brief from the safeguarding minister to the immigration minister, and the most pernicious thing about it, which I've tried to point out again and again and again, is that a huge number, the vast majority of children in our modern slavery system are British. So the idea that you've given it to the immigration minister, I can only assume that they're going to deport those children to Bury St Edmunds. It's absolutely flabbergasting to me, and certainly one of the reformations that the Labour Party and I certainly want to see is actually the discrepancy within what the support provision currently available for victims of modern slavery. It used to be that there was a two-tier system of victims of modern slavery that were EU and external to the EU, that caused problems with how that support could be meted out with regard to housing and local authority support. But now you see that the biggest divide actually is the contracts that the Home Office has in modern slavery to provide support and services, where British people are involved, because actually what happens in those cases, especially British children, is that it often goes into just a sort of generic pathway of your local authority. So if you need rehousing because of gang violence that you're suffering, or cuckooing that you're suffering at the hands of your trafficker and your slaver, like, you'll end up on a council house waiting list. So if you're in Birmingham, you'll end up in it for 5.5 years. So you know, there is a massive discrepancy actually at the moment in support, and there is some good work in piloting going on around the country. It's always a pilot. The government never does anything more than a pilot in how to manage that better. And that's what I wanted to be talking about in the world of modern slavery and the advances in, and we were promised this bill, but instead of getting a modern slavery bill, it seems we're just getting like 9 paragraphs in an immigration bill that has absolutely nothing to do with it. As Justine has said, it is a tool, it is a gift for slavers. I think that the government, and Theresa May said this in as polite a way as she possibly could. I was not quite so polite. She basically said to the minister yesterday, or was it yesterday? The days have been so long. I can't tell you how irritating committee of the whole house is. And it should have been done in a much more detailed fashion, the scrutiny of this bill. We rely on the Lords now to do some of that work. But we had 2 days. Normally we'd have weeks with evidence being gathered, with people like Justine coming in to give evidence, and we had 2 days of committee of the whole house, and the minister doesn't have to respond to every question you ask, whereas in committee they have to. But the detail of what has been put in there is completely and utterly unnecessary, and it won't make any difference. And what Theresa May had to point out to the minister in the politest way was, he just doesn't understand what he's talking about, was basically what she said. He said, I think that maybe, you have to do that stupid parliament language, that maybe the minister has misunderstood the service he's in charge of, was essentially what she said. And it does seem to me that the government have misunderstood that that the idea, as Justina said, it's the Home Office who refers you into the system, and I think the two biggest referral points are the police and the border force, both directly responsibilities of the Home Office. So actually, if there are fraudulent referrals going in, that's Suella Braverman's fault. And I repeatedly asked her to tell me which agency is the one referring in these fraudulent cases. I've yet to have an answer. I've asked parliamentary questions. I asked them on the floor of the House yesterday. I'm getting nowhere in seeking a proper response to that. And that's because there is nowhere. There isn't any data on that, because it doesn't exist. So that's a sort of a fundamental, but I think that they think that people just claim it, like just go, I'm a victim of modern slavery, like I'm Spartacus, and that then the system immediately like handles them with kid gloves, and that they will be able to immediately go forward to the police with their case. I mean, absolute lols, frankly, on the idea that even if victims of modern slavery agree to go through the conviction process to capture their slavers, the government's record on conviction is absolutely woeful. And even if they did, you're talking at the moment, you're going to wait 3 years for that trial to come to fruition. So, if we think that rape conviction is bad, modern slavery conviction is, I mean, it's 0.00000. It's on the floor. So the idea that, oh, well, if they come and take part in conviction, then they can stay, which is what the bill says, is just an absolute misunderstanding. As if like you just walk in and the bobby goes, don't worry, we'll catch the baddies. And that's how the system works. They are absolutely, it's a bit like, when you're a professional at something. So if you're a teacher and you watch a school drama, or you go to courts a lot and you watch a crime-based drama, and you spend the whole time shouting at the screen thinking that'd never happen, like every single thing that's ever filmed in Parliament, I'm like, that's not real, that wouldn't happen. Like, that is how I feel sitting in front of the ministers, like they don't know what they're talking about. And so that has been really, really complicated. I would argue, and have tried to argue, that the greatest incentive that the government have created for people to declare that they have modern slavery in order to, that they are victims of slavery in order to game the system, is something that's created entirely by the government, and that is the backlog. So when I first worked in service, it was between 45 and 90 days that from your reasonable grounds by a Home Office agency to you being assessed as yes or no, and the vast majority it's yes, are a victim of modern slavery. That would take between 45 and 90 days when the service first set up. Today, it's around 600 days on average. And you're talking about kids who've been sexually exploited, and we're making them wait 600 days for a decision to say, yeah, we believe you. And that's done by quite low paid, no scrutiny over it. staff in the Home Office. You can't even ask in environment. But the incentive, if people were going to fake it, because it buys them time, the people who've bought them time is the delayed system, is the government's own failure to keep on top of cases of modern slavery. So in a 45 to 90 day period, you know, even if it did allow people an incentive, you've got 90 days then in that period. Now you're talking 3 years. So that's on them. They have overseen a system of total delay, and they keep arguing it's because of the small boats. But the biggest increase in victims of modern slavery over the last 10 years, every year until this year, which outstripped the number of, so if cases went up by 20%, then cases of British people went up by 31%. Every year for the past 5 years, the number of British people going into the modern slavery system outstripped the overall increase in the number of victims altogether. So it's an increase in British people, not small boats or lorries or whatever. The other thing that I think is really important to remember, and trying to find some carve out, every amendment that we have made, the Lords will go on and make again. And every amendment that I made feels like a dagger through my heart, because actually I'm sort of trying to polish a turd, if you'll excuse the phrase. I just don't think that the modern slavery element should be in it at all. We're not going to win that argument, it seems, at the moment. But it's, you know, I really don't wish to try and make what is essentially a pernicious argument. But one of the obvious carve-outs that we should absolutely push for is that 80% of all victims of modern slavery found to be legitimate cases are exploited in the UK. These are British criminals exploiting these people. And how on earth you could argue that somebody who had been exploited here, regardless of how they arrived here, where the crime that they suffered we are responsible for preventing, doesn't have a right to access to support, is just absolutely, well, it's shameful. And there's nothing I can do to improve this current bill, I'm afraid. I did ask quite a lot of Tories as they went into the voting lobbies the other day, what would Jesus do? And it didn't seem to shift any of their votes. But we will keep on trying. The Lords will undoubtedly. The Lords is a saviour of modern slavery. Actually, it's where all the expertise is, and it will do a better job than the Commons.
Thanks very much for that, Jess. Some staggering stuff. And just how misguided the government are, how wrong they've got it. I think like you say, on the committee of the whole house, I think it's revealing as much as it is damaging. So loads of stuff there. We've got a bit of time now. Thanks, Jess. A bit of time now for some questions for Justine and Jess. So please pop them into the chat, send them to me. We've got one or two to go on first. We'll try and fit as many as possible. The first one, I've missed the name. I won't go to scroll back now, but something I'm not sure we've mentioned to me was the Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner. It's something we as a party have been active in sort of calling for and highlighting. So I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll ask sort of three in a row, then I'll come to you, Jess and Justine, for reflections. First, Anti-Slavery Commissioner, the impact of its absence and perhaps the intent on the government's part. Secondly, from I think it was Elizabeth, Jess, you mentioned that legislation, we've not been successful in changing it. How can we make a difference, perhaps external to that? I know you said the Lords is an option, but external to that, what can we do? And then finally from Philip, what would a new modern slavery bill do? And is it now unlikely in light of changing legislation? So I think following up on what you said there, Jess. So Jess, Justine, shall I come to you first, Justine, on that one? Or Jess, you've unmuted if I want to go to you first, if that's all right. Okay.
Yeah, so the Modern Slavery Commissioner, yes, we've been without one now for, and a Victims Commissioner, in fact, both of them. It's absolutely purposeful. I usually believe in cock up over conspiracy. But I think this is both, in both those counts. I think that we have in the past had exceptionally good anti-slavery commissioners who were quite robust with in a mixture, but you know, Kevin Highland was incredibly robust with the government, maybe too robust. And Sarah Thornton always was seen, I think, more as being one of them, not politically, but like, you know, she was much more metered, but she still absolutely, and on this bill, is trying to take them apart. But yeah, I think they're basically trying to get somebody who they feel will say what they want them to. You know, we're at that stage at the moment with the government. So yes, look, they said in the Queen's speech that we would have a modern slavery bill, but they've said in every single Queen's speech for the past 12 years that we'd have a victims bill, and it was only published today. So who knows if that is the case, and we can't do anything. I don't think we won't check. Look, Theresa May and Ian Duncan Smith have laid down the gauntlet that if this modern slavery stuff doesn't get better, that there will be more of a rebellion, and the government might shift a little bit. There'll be some sort of concession that will placate them enough to keep them quiet, but won't placate us, is where I think we end. But also I would say don't worry too much, because nobody's going to actually be deported. It's not going to work. It's all just about headlines. Like, this bill is not going to do anything that isn't already happening. Actually, you know, it's barges today, it'll be tents tomorrow. It's whatever makes the headline. Like, it's not real. None of it's going to actually happen.
Justine. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, I agree. Independent Anti-Slavery Commissioner, you know, when that was introduced as part of the bill in 2014, it was seen as a real, you know, kind of step forward, that we'd have somebody holding the government to account. And as Jess has said, you know, that was the case with the previous two incumbents. But, you know, we've been, again, lobbying the Home Office and the government to make sure that, you know, a commissioner is in place. I mean, as Jess said, there's also no victims commissioner. And, you know, it's woeful, you know, and I think this comes kind of almost to the new modern slavery bill as well. I mean, you know, a lot of thought and effort has gone into thinking about what should be in a new modern slavery bill. You know, the fact that we've got this immigration bill now is riding roughshod slightly over the whole thing anyway. But you know, transparency in supply chains was meant to feature as a core part of that, and we know we've seen through the health bill and the procurement bill that some movement has been made in that area. But unfortunately, when I was working on the bill back in 2014, it was very clear that this was not about victims necessarily. When the bill was first introduced, there were no victims provisions in the bill. It was very much seen as a law enforcement approach. Despite my own views and the views of other officials, eventually we did, and that was through pressure through various different and cross-party support, actually, because everybody recognised that we needed this. There was just slightly different opinions on how that should be brought forward, which is always the case with any legislation. So I think we're unlikely to see a modern slavery bill. I think there's no chance, yes, and we've kind of known that for some time, and you know, it's just sad that we're also through other routes eroding the protections for victims. What I would say is that we've already had indication from some border force colleagues that the individuals that they're putting forward, and this comes back to Jessie's point, which is absolutely spot on, they are also getting 9 out of 10 being denied access to that initial support. So not even being able to kind of get across the first hurdle. And we know that first hurdle, the threshold for getting access to help and support while you're cases being considered has actually increased significantly. So we're seeing fewer and fewer people given access to the help and support that they so desperately need at that front end. That doesn't just include accommodation, that includes, you know, counselling, legal support, etc. So it's quite a dire situation, and we've seen the erosion of the support, help and information that victims have been entitled to and should receive, which was supported through the Modern Slavery Bill, not as the original Modern Slavery Bill, now the Act. But we know that that's not enough. It never was enough. But now we're seeing that being eroded even further. So I think it is a worrying time.
Thanks, Justine. A couple more questions. One, I think, mostly for you, Justine, which is from Jane, which is essentially what can we do at a local level as individuals to shine a light on exploitation? And then on to Jess, I think this one's more for you from Jean-Roger. What would a Labour and cooperative government do around this issue, particularly a Labour cooperative government with regards to this particular piece of legislation? So Justine, perhaps on that first one first, around local exploitation and what we as individuals can do.
Absolutely. I think easy to say, very difficult to do, raise awareness. I mean, you know, there are so many people that I still speak to, you know, in my hometown, in anywhere I go, you know, there's a lack of understanding, and you know, some of that has been through the fact that we talk about interchangeably about modern slavery and human trafficking. People understand it's people coming in on small boats, but as Jess has mentioned, and as I've said previously, you know, it's much wider than that. So I think raising awareness, getting people to understand, and I saw in some of the chat as well, you know, the magnitude of this, the sexual exploitation, the criminal exploitation, domestic servitude. We've had people in private households you know, being employed, so to speak, by a couple who are exploiting an individual, you know, and it beggars belief that you think actually it could be my next door neighbour, but that's genuinely what's happening and what we're seeing, as well as the raft of labour exploitation, you know, agriculture, farms, factories, hospitality, construction, facilities management. It just goes right throughout the whole kind of labour practices, the fact that we have temporary labour, the fact that people don't know their rights when they're working. You know, we have to raise that awareness. We have to get people to understand that this is an issue that's happening in our high streets, in our car washes and nail bars, and that you can do something about it. You can make different choices. We make choices every day about the goods and services that we buy. We as an organisation are working very closely with many high street brands and retailers to raise their awareness, because I think for far too long we've allowed businesses to make decisions that ultimately benefit them and maybe consumers, but certainly don't benefit anybody that's working in and down their supply chains. And that awareness is and has been raised since 2015, but we know that many businesses are required to produce a modern slavery statement each year, but we still know there's a large percentage that still haven't done that, and that's been enacted since 2016. So, you know, this is an issue that we keep needing to press the pedal on. We keep needing to kind of move the dial, and we need to get people to understand what it is that they might be seeing in front of them. Ultimately, modern slavery is not really a well understood term, but I think if you think about it as exploitation and abuse of one person over another, then you start to see how this could potentially play out, both you know, within certain situations, but also particularly within cities, towns, villages, right across the UK.
Brilliant, thanks, Justine. Jess, over to you.
Yeah, so what would we do? I mean, on this particular bill, I mean, this is, you know, we just wouldn't have it. It's I mean, no matter, you know, your views, and I imagine I can guess what they are, and they're the same as mine, of the morality of the situation, it isn't practicably possible There is nowhere to return these people to. There is no safe third country. Even if you were to consider Rwanda to be an option, that they simply haven't committed to the numbers that I mean, they certainly haven't committed to 44,000 people. But so, you know, that just simply isn't the case. Having worked in modern slavery services for many years, actually one of the things that isn't the point that isn't being made, and Theresa May did definitely try and make this, is actually that, you know, that there is not there is a culture of returns actually in modern slavery services. Quite a lot of people wanted to be resettled back where they came from. This idea that people are just like, they're like jumping on some bandwagon to stay in our country really oversells our country, I think. Lots of people I worked with wanted to return or move to a different country and have a different life because they'd been so badly exploited here. So look, you know, I'm not against the idea of returns in and of themselves, but this bill would absolutely not something we would do. What the Labour Party, I mean, the Labour Party has set out its sort of 5-point plan on specifically on how it would go about trying to stop the boats. It is going to take a huge amount of time. Funnily enough, there was a real effort, and actually it's one of the reasons we have the boats, is because Theresa May's sort of successful use of both policing and tech that stopped the lorries being and like the policing of the border. I remember once I had a absolute car full, 2 kids in the back of a Toyota Aygo, tiny boot, like ram full of like camping, and at the border they searched it. I was like, look, if the migrant managed to get in there, they've worked hard. I could barely fit in the Aygo myself, but you know, it's just the new means, and you can't solve the problem without having safe means of transport for people from Iran, from Eritrea, from Yemen, from, you know, this is, it's fundamentally like, and nobody's saying this is an open borders issue, but at the moment you would struggle to find a single safe route unless you're Ukrainian. And they bang on about Ukrainian or Afghan, but even Hong Kongers, I've had people struggling to get here, and certainly poor Hong Kongers haven't got a chance. So it's, you know, they keep leaning on the idea that it'll be, you know, that actually we're very generous in all this, but it's actually like, well, you know, my sister-in-law's family can't come from Iran and to be with their family who live here, even though they're all women and they're not safe. Like, that's the reality of the situation. And so that needs to be sorted out. But on modern slavery, look, I think that fundamentally there needs to be a tearing out of the system for both children, and also a proper complex needs pathway and support system that specifically exists for the kinds of British victims of human trafficking. So, you know, if you've got substance misuse issues and you've been involved in criminality and you have you've been sexually exploited, it just really is not that great a facility for complex needs accommodation across our country to deal with that. And I could say the same if I was here talking about domestic violence. So the Labour Party, as well as looking at how the referral process goes and how the support process goes, looking for a decentralized system that would make the support services better. But we're not, you know, we're not even anywhere near the phase of making support services better anymore. We're just fighting fire.
Thanks,
and they're going to trumpet, they will go out and they will trumpet a drop in the number of people, and they will say we've reduced modern slavery, and it won't be. They will have reduced the ability of people to come forward. And I can just feel the sham statistics coming at me.
Absolutely. I should say on the first issue as well, which Justine touched on in terms of what we can do, I wouldn't be doing my job properly if I didn't mention again our local government charter, which, as I say, over 100 councils signed it, but there are some who haven't. And I've seen councils on the call, but we as individuals can do that as well and encourage our councillors, our councils to sign up to that charter, which commits them to go further than what they should be doing already required by law. It commits them to go further and look into their procurement and that sort of stuff as well. So that's one thing we can do. I'm conscious of time, and I'm conscious I'm going to maybe cheese some people off, but by missing out a couple of questions. But what I want to do is just give Jess and Justine the opportunity for any final remarks. And I think important within those, if it's okay, to reflect on what, I know, Justine, you've touched on this, but what we as a party and membership can do as well to support you. One of the things I really love and cherish about our party and our movement is that we put solutions into action. So I think it's really important, if we can, in what is a very difficult call, and it's sometimes easy to feel helpless and hopeless within this, but if we can go away and take something from this that we as individuals can do and as a party can do, what that might be. So Justine, perhaps I'll come to you first for any final remarks, and if you can reflect on that. I know you have already, so I'm putting you on the spot a little bit, but that would be great.
Yeah, no, thank you. You know, I think the thing for me is I don't want to live in a society that's inhumane and quite frankly immoral. You know, I think we need to do everything we can. I was a civil servant for 28 years. And, you know, the reason I was in that role for so long and why I moved to Unseen is because, you know, I care about people. And I think everybody on this call cares about people. And to have this bill large, you know, looming in the very near future, it just horrifies me. The other thing I would just say quickly is just around kids. You know, we've had so many situations where we've seen kids going missing. They're housed in hotels, they're housed in inappropriate conditions, they're not getting the help and support they need. You know, the likelihood is if you come here as a non-accompanied asylum seeking child, you are likely to be able to stay till you're 18, and then you're probably going to get shipped off somewhere. So regardless of having several years here, maybe you're schooling here, maybe you've settled here, you don't really know any other life, the chances are that you won't be able to remain here. And again, for me, that's shocking. If we can't help and support, you know, and I'm talking obviously about UASC and the unaccompanied asylum seeking children, but, you know, the same principle as Jess mentioned about UK nationals, we are just failing on every level. And this just can't continue. In terms of what more we can do, I mean, I would go and speak to somebody else. You know, if every single person on this call spoke to 10 people about what we've talked about this evening, then we start to create that understanding of what it actually involves, what it means, what this bill means, not only for, you know, those who think that the whole problem is around individuals jumping into small boats, but actually our fundamental human rights are being eroded. You know, we will get to a position where we will ignore European courts' decisions because we choose to have an alternative route through a British Bill of Rights, which is going to come you know, shortly after this bill. We see those fundamental rights being eroded. So we need to all sit up and take note. This is just the thin end of the wedge, and I think we will see you know, significant concerns as we move through the next 12 months.
Thanks, Justine. Jess?
Yeah, look, I would say, I suppose that there is a huge amount to be done at a local level with regard to awareness and local councils. So actually, you know, all local authorities are national referral mechanism first responders. And if you were to speak to 99% of the people working even with vulnerable people across councils, like housing officers or welfare officers, I bet you they wouldn't know that that's what they had that power to do that. Similarly, I could make the same. The police are first responders, and I have been in many conversations about the national referral mechanism with police officers, and they haven't known what the hell I was talking about. And so there is a real piece of work to be done about the sort of prevention and support that is available in local areas, asking questions of your police and crime commissioners, asking questions of your local councils about what provision they provide. And local councils are massively under the cosh with the, and one of the amendments that the Labour Party sought to move yesterday was that the local councils had to be consulted with, and the government voted against it. Now, bear in mind, I come from the local authority with the highest number of refugee hotels. That's the local authority. In fact, I think my constituency has probably got the highest. And I just, you know, to give you some hope about not wanting to live in an immoral world, I've never received one complaint about that. Never. So this idea that there's a load of people with pitchforks outside, like in my, like, I think Scotland has one hotel and maybe like Wales has two. Like my constituency has like 8. So just 1/10 of Birmingham. And like I say, I've never had any. So there, you know, there are, I'm not saying it doesn't put strain on local resource, and that people couldn't be fired up to think that the reason they can't get a school place is because of these hotels, which would just not be true. They couldn't get one before because there weren't enough schools built. The, you know, it's there is goodwill. There is goodwill out there. And it's just that people aren't aware of this, and people don't. And like, even like with the sort of language about like grooming gangs and things, like those are slaves that we are talking about, and there is so much that we need to change. And the county lines, like all the different terminology, those are enslaved children who have been targeted specifically for their vulnerabilities. And I just think that, yeah, there is a huge level of responsibility for local authorities across the country to be doing much more, because every area is about to have them. So, you know, it's Birmingham City Council has like an entire team of people that deals with this stuff, because obviously they would, because that's like, you know, it's not new news here. But we're about to see lots of local authorities across the country who are not as well versed in this sort of thing. And I think that, you know, we have an opportunity to be asking some questions about what provision is going to be in place to support those children, to ensure that missing incidents aren't being thrown up. That I think would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think really important place to finish. As I say, sometimes it's a difficult topic and it's sometimes easy to feel powerless, but that's a really nice place to finish, Jess, in terms of that hope and optimism and what we can do. So Justine, a massive thank you to you. Jess, a huge thanks to you, in particular a day that started so early and in such inauspicious company. hopefully you found sort of friendlier and more productive company.
To be honest with you, I'm in bed already.
Oh, well, there we go.
Don't feel too bad for me.
We'll let you go. Well, listen, thanks to both of you, and thanks to everyone on the call. We've got our marching orders, as it were. We know what we can do, and the party will continue to be active to watch this space. And a huge thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. Take care.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.